What are you talking about? What are you talking about? What are you talking about? What are you talking about?
One of what we could call the higher priests of atheism, Richard Dawkins, was recently on a TV show, and he was being interviewed. And he was saying in this interview, you know, most Christians, they don't know anything about their Bible. They just don't know about their book. So the interviewer said, okay, that's interesting. You believe, Mr. Dawkins, you're a big fan of Darwin, aren't you? Of course, yes, Darwin's very important. Could you tell me the full title of his book, The Origin of the Species? And Richard Dawkins started going, oh God. He said, oh God. So he found that this atheist, or this renowned atheist, is being put in a difficult situation. He doesn't know the answer, and he ends up going, oh God, like, oh God, help me, what am I going to say? And this is a guy who says he doesn't believe in God.
But you're saying they're not Christians, even if they think of themselves as Christian. You know what they are, even though they tell you.
I'm not presenting my opinion here. This press release is offered to people to look down it and say, look, these people who call themselves Christians actually don't read the Bible, don't go to church, don't believe Jesus was the Son of God, don't even know what the first book of the New Testament is.
But Richard,
it's up to you to make up your mind whether you think they're Christian. Don't ask me. My opinion is not relevant.
Richard, if I said to you, what is the full title of The Origin of Species? I'm sure you could tell me that.
Yes, I could.
Go on then.
On the origin of species, on the origin of species, there is a subtitle with respect to the preservation of favoured races in the fight in the struggle for
You're
life.
the high pope of Darwinism.
Not bad, I'd give him some justice.
But if you asked people who believed in evolution what that question, and you came back and said 2% got it right, it would terribly easy for me to go, they don't really believe it after all. It's just not fair to ask people these questions. They self-identify as Christians, and I think you should respect that.
And this is a guy who says he doesn't believe in God.
What are you talking about? What are you talking about? What are you talking about?
World, and we want to have a connection with you as a human being.
I want to communicate truth.
Good.
Do you believe in evolution?
Do I believe in evolution?
Yes.
I believe that I don't have adequate information to even make that judgment.
Well, that's very sensible. Now, let me give you some adequate information.
Oh, please do so.
Okay. The evidence for evolution is absolutely solid. It's as strong as the evidence that the planets orbit. You do believe the planets orbit the sun, do you? Yeah.
Yes, I did science as a bachelor's.
Well, you did science, so why don't you know about evolution?
Because it was psychology, that's why.
Well, psychology ought to include evolution because the human mind, the human brain, is an evolved organ. Okay, the evidence for evolution, although it happened a long time in the past, so you can't actually see it happening, or most of the time you can't. Nevertheless, I use the analogy of a detective coming on the scene of a crime after the crime's been committed, so you can't actually see it happen. But what you see is all the evidence, all the clues, all the fingerprints, all the footprints and everything else. And that adds up massively, more strongly than any court of law.
I agree with this,
yeah.
But the only contention some religious philosophers have, for example, not all religious people don't like science. Many religious people like science. For example, a lot of the scientists were revived from the Islamic history, as you know. The question that they would have is, evolution is a non-complementary paradigm with what's happening in cosmology, for example. For example, if you look at physics and the constants, some people say there'll be a fine-tuning here. There's some form
what do you mean by
design.
non-complementary paradigm?
Because,
what do you mean?
For example, I think you answered that question well in your book, page 157, 158, when you said we don't have an answer for physics like we do as in evolution. So the question you posed was, who designed the designer?
Yeah.
And I think what some Islamic philosophers contemporary would say, that's an interesting question, but even in the philosophy of science, and I think downstairs you wanted to ignore that question about the philosophy of science, the best explanation doesn't require an explanation. And to have an added infinite regress of explanations undermines the very fact that we need an explanation. So the design argument is more plausible than the chance with regards to the fine-tuning of the universe, which has nothing to do with evolution. That's
No, it's
way
nothing to do with it.
away.
It's a question of physics.
Yeah.
But how can it possibly be helpful to explain the origin of the universe, to postulate something complicated like a god? Why don't you say it's something like a spontaneous quantum fluctuation, something like that, which is simple?
Richard, that's a very good point.
Which is simple.
That's a very good point. But haven't you assumed that God is complicated and made of many parts?
Well, God's got to be complicated, hasn't he? Otherwise, because he couldn't forgive your sins and listen to your prayers.
But you're misconstruing physicality for like an entity with ability. Someone may be able to do complex things. Doesn't make his nature complex, though, surely. Because I think you're superimposing.
What are you talking about?
Okay, do you want me to clarify?
If God is capable of listening to prayers, forgiving sins, knowing when you've done wrong and punishing you for it, how could he possibly be anything other than complex?
So are you saying that the design argument is not plausible because it creates more questions than it answers? Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay, but don't you think then a bloated multiverse or multi-universe is far more complex?
No, I don't actually. A bloated multiverse.
It has no rational force, does it?
A bloated multiverse is actually rather simple. It's just very wasteful. It's very uneconomical.
But doesn't go in line with Occam's razor, though. Do not multiply.
Yes, it does. Right? It does really. No, it does rather.
How does it do that?
It's not. For a start, it's not beyond necessity. If it actually helps to explain something, it's not very complicated. It's just saying there are lots and lots and lots of universes.
Well, you're saying there's an infinite amount of universes.
Well, I'm not saying that, but
that's the theory.
Some physicists do. I'm not necessarily.
Designed by an intelligent creator, omnipotent creator being. Can you just run me past why, if we're all designed, most religious people, first thing they do is chop off half of the genitalia?
I'm going to go.
Take care, Richard. Thank you very much.
What are you talking about?